Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome everyone. Obviously the last video was doing the CNC laser work on top of a little bowl, just to give an example of what can be done there. And I've been playing around with a bit more, so for example that's a spindle work, and that's actually what they call a 3D sort of like, it's a topographical map. And that's part of the Lake District, so in there is Scarfell Pike. Took hours to run. That's about a 9-hour job. It's a big learning curve for the laser side and really the spindle work. And one of the things I've been playing around with on the laser is to create like clock faces. If you'd seen some of my previous work, I've done sort of like some pyrography clock faces, and usually for those clocks I usually create a segmented ring like this and cut a piece of plywood to fit inside, do some pyrography work manually on there and create the whole thing. Now I thought obviously with the laser I would then be able to do all my own topography work from the laser. At the same time, when I was going through my clock movements, I've also got some little 40mm hands, and I thought, right, well I'll use the same sort of image and I'll create a smaller clock face. So that's where I've come up with these ones. This is 5mm plywood. What I'll do here, so you can just see the process, I'll just show on the side here a time lapse of what's going on. So the laser was fairly simple. I had to play around with the laser for quite a bit because the power on the laser makes a massive difference, and I had to do all sorts of tests, and it wasn't until I got the laser down to about 20% power that I actually got it down to a level which is what is being done here, and I'm actually happy with. The other issue I had as well was that photographs, especially on something like plywood, which has already got a little bit of a brown colour to it anyway, you need to have a really contrasty picture. So the picture I'm using here, in actual fact, I couldn't do much of it in Photoshop. I had to actually use it in GIMP to then create sort of like the equivalent of the find edges filter that you get in Photoshop, to then create all this really high contrasty image. Now the numerals, I didn't have to worry about them too much because I'd already created them in Photoshop, and therefore I just had to worry about concentrating on the image. But again, as I found, it's that you needed that really high contrasting level, and with lots of playing around, got to the power setting that I wanted before I was then finally happy with it. The actual burn time with the laser was about 15 or 16 minutes, so it wasn't very long at all. Now compared to if I tried to do something like that manually with a pyrography, I'd have been looking at 2 or 3 hours minimum, and it could have been a lot more. So once I've got the image I wanted, I could then go over to the spindle. Now the spindle, there's 2 reasons why I've used the spindle. One is time. The process time on this spindle for the cutout on this is about 15 minutes, so it's not really that long at all. And when I actually created the piece for this, that probably took me a best part of half an hour, messing around in the workshop here. Which then brings me on to the second point, accuracy. With using the spindle, I could precisely cut to fractions of a millimetre what size I want. So the actual opening hole in the centre there, for where the actual movement has got to come through, 7.5mm. Now yes, I could use a 7.5mm drill bit, but then, I mean, even then you've got to then properly use your drill press to make sure you've got it fully 90 degrees. It's also quite easy to wander off the work unless you've got everything fully clamped down and precisely you're going to drill where you want to be. Also then there's the actual diameter. Now if you've already created a frame like this and you can measure it properly, you can then cut out your piece to the exact size that you want, and therefore reduce the amount of play you've got in there. Now again, the spindle work does take a lot of work on there as well initially. I use a piece of software called Fusion 360 to do all my spindle work, and it's a free piece of software for hobbyists and for somebody who may be earning up to about $1,000 a year from it. There is a commercial license for it as well. There are other free options as well, but they don't have so much detail. You can also go for some other commercial use ones, or fully paid versions, which are probably sort of similar price to the Fusion, if not more expensive. But from what I've heard, Fusion 360 has the same capabilities of literally all the other pieces of software, if not more control. But there is a massive steep learning curve, and I've had to watch countless videos on learning how to use it. As you can see here, I've got 2 here, and I mean, it probably shows from the back there. The first one that I did, the smaller one, didn't fully cut out, and I then decided then to create the larger one. Now both of these images have been printed with an 80mm diameter clock face, And I thought when I did the actual cutout on this, it might be a little bit tight. So I then decided to then reprint the second one and then do the cutout for the 90mm. Now modifying the actual code, where this one is actually a 90mm cutout compared to a 100mm cutout, literally took me probably 3-4 minutes. And again, 15 minutes probably cutout time meant that I got something straight away. Now the other good thing about this as well is that, I mean, it certainly notices on the bigger one, I've got tabs in there. Those tabs are less than 1mm thick. So being plywood as well, I can then go off now with a Stanley knife, cut those tabs out and then clean these all off, which is what I'm going to do next. Now you'll see here that both my images have been done this way. Yes, one's that way up and the other one's the other way round. It's just the way I rotated it when I actually did the actual printing process. Especially with your material, you've really got to watch out what you do with these as well. Now you'll notice obviously this plywood is really, really grainy. So therefore I needed to make sure that the grain actually ran across that way. Otherwise the whole thing would just look a bit of a mess. And the main big reason here is really because of the water on here. It just looks more natural when you've got the grain running that way. It's almost like there's ripples there. If the grain was running the other way and you'd got a lot of these lines going that way, it just wouldn't look so natural. Every plywood is totally different. This is the most recent plywood I bought from Wicks locally, which I'm not overly happy with. Here's some older plywood I've got, and that's probably some 9mm. And you can see the grain on this is so much lighter, so much different. And again though, the image would work better going across with the grain. Having these tabs just makes things a lot easier as well. And this one, yeah, it's going to, I can still cut it out. The material that's left in the bottom there is probably only about 0.1, 0.2mm thick, so it should hopefully still cut out fine with a Stanley knife. But I've just given an example here, and it's always best to probably work on the back. Just cut the tabs, and you can see I'm literally hardly putting any effort on this whatsoever. It's a slightly thicker one. And there you go, that's now out. So I can now go round that just with some light sandpaper, tidy that up, and I've got a finished piece. This is what I've come up with so far, and this is what I like about wood turning. Your design is just down to your imagination. So I like to try and make use of most of the wood if possible. I've turned a reasonable amount away, but I wanted that sort of like outer rim on here. Now what I've done is, how well it shows on the camera, you can probably see where the jaws sit and how far the recess is on there. There's a mortise on the back there which is probably about 4 or 5mm deep at all, and it's the lip for the jaws to rest on is only probably about 1 or 2mm wide, so it's only just so that this goes on flat. The opening here is about 90mm, so when I place this inside it's going to fit in there nicely. What I've also done on the inside is I've used the antique mahogany spirit stains, and also on the back as well, and then just finish that off with 2 coats of wood wax 22. So I'm now about to use the stain on the front and outside, and I just thought you'd like to see how this looks. So it totally transforms what is a fairly plain piece of wood, being tulip wood, into something totally different. But this is what I like about these stains, is that because they're natural wood colours, it's not there sort of like the reds, yellows, blues that the chestnut sell as well. So everything looks totally natural, and it's just a case of wiping it all on, and if necessary just go over with a second coat just to darken up a little bit. So let that dry off now. I will then knock that back with a bit of Web, a couple of coats of sanding sealer, and wood wax 22 again. That's the finished clock, and I've got to say, really pleased the way this has come out. So it's a piece of tulip wood, and because tulip wood is very sort of usually very light, and often it can be quite plain, but this in actual fact still had quite a bit of grain coming through it. And I've done it before. I've used the spirit stains from Chestnut. This is their wood colour range, the antique mahogany, and I think that brings out the wood really nicely on this. Now the way I've done this is, first of all, I just mounted it with a screw chuck. I then took out the back. I've got a small mortise in there to go onto my 100mm jaws. Doesn't need to be too deep, just enough to grab hold with the jaws. The important thing is then is that the shoulder which this face fits on inside has got to be deep enough so that the movement is obviously going to be under the back height. So that's the important area, and the initial blank was probably about that sort of height, so I took a fair bit off the top, but I wanted to retain some of that depth on there. This is what I like about wood turning. It's all about your own creative imagination, and I wanted some form of a largest sort of rim on the outside there, but not something just straight. I've also decided to leave the actual clock face so that it's just had sanding sealer on it, so there's been no finish on it whatsoever. And I think it looks a lot nicer with the sort of like the shiny outside wood, and really the more matte finish for the actual clock face. And I think the clock hands on there being gold go really, really well as well. So it's a very, very simple project to do, and just another example really of using the CNC to do the burning as well as the cutting out of the actual clock face. Now I've done something similar to this recently with a bit of tulip wood, which is where I made a thermometer. I put that on its own sort of like individual stand, and I thought about doing that with this, and I just thought, no, I'm not going to do that. So you do have the option obviously of hanging it on the wall if you want to. You can obviously put a nail into your wall and probably hang it that way. But at the same time as well, what I might do is, I've got some more plywood there, I'm going to probably take in the house with me, and over the next few days going to have a ponder about how to create some form of a stand for this to actually sit on. So there's a small plywood stand on the bottom there for it to just basically sit on like a tabletop display. May well come to nothing, but it's something I'm going to play with. Thanks a lot for watching.